You're watching Free Speech TV.
From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Its misuse of exotic and complex financial structures helped spread toxic mortgages throughout the financial system. And when the system finally collapsed under the weight of those toxic mortgages, Goldman profited from the collapse.
Goldman gets grilled. Executives from the bailed-out Wall Street giant Goldman Sachs are summoned to a Senate panel where they face nearly 11 hours of questioning over their aggressive marketing of mortgage investments to clients. At the same time, the firm was betting against them. We'll play highlights and get analysis. Then investigative journalist Danny Schechter's latest film, Plunder, the Crime of Our Time.
The lack of media scrutiny, the absence of regulation, the widespread illusion that markets and real estate could only go up created a casino mentality, an environment for successful fraudsters and white-collar criminals.
And remember Syed Fahad Hashmi? He's the former Brooklyn College student who's been held in 23-hour solitary confinement for nearly 3 years in pretrial detention. Well, in a last-minute deal with prosecutors on the eve of his trial yesterday, he's pled guilty to 1 count of material support to a foreign terrorist organization. He faces up to 15 years in prison. In a Democracy Now! Exclusive, we'll speak with his brother and his former college advisor. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Executives from the bailed-out Wall Street giant Goldman Sachs faced tough questioning Tuesday at a Senate hearing on their role in the financial crisis. Current and former Goldman officials were grilled on their aggressive marketing of mortgage investments. At the same time, the firm was betting the investments would fail. During his opening remarks, Senator Carl Levin of Michigan cited internal Goldman documents to argue the firm had betrayed its clients.
The firm's own documents show that while it was marketing risky mortgage-related securities, it was placing large bets against the U.S. mortgage market. The firm has repeatedly denied making those large bets, despite overwhelming evidence that they did so. Now, why does that matter? Surely there is no law, ethical guideline, or moral injunction against profit. But Goldman Sachs didn't just make money. It profited by taking advantage of its clients' reasonable expectation that it would not sell products that it did not want to succeed.
The hearing was held as Republicans blocked the Democrats' financial reform bill from advancing in the Senate for a second consecutive day. Democrats remain 3 votes shy of the 60 needed to override a Republican filibuster and bring the measure to the Senate floor. We'll have more on the Goldman Sachs hearings and the financial reform bill after headlines. The U.S. Coast Guard is considering a controlled burn of the vast oil slick approaching the Louisiana coastline from last week's oil rig explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. A pipe that had been attached to the rig continues to spill around 42,000 gallons of oil per day. Rear Admiral Mary Landry of the U.S. Coast Guard said the spills within 21 miles of Louisiana shores.
It's reached just within, I think it says 21 miles. So it is the closest it's been to shore throughout this response. And we're paying attention to that, very careful attention to that, and are engaged with the states in the coastal areas.
The rig was drilling for the energy giant BP. 11 crew members are still missing and presumed dead. Newly disclosed documents, meanwhile, show BP heavily lobbied against stricter offshore drilling safety rules when they were being considered last year. In September, BP wrote the U.S. Minerals Management Service that additional safety regulation was unnecessary to replace existing voluntary standards. On Tuesday, Democratic Congress members Henry Waxman of California and Bart Stupak of Michigan asked BP to explain what they knew about safety risks at the drilling site before the explosion took place. In a letter to BP, Waxman and Stupak also expressed concern BP's attempting to manage the spill, quote, with techniques that have never been used before at these ocean depths. President Obama met with his panel on the national deficit Tuesday as it held its opening session. Obama formed the Bipartisan National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility earlier this year to provide recommendations on deficit reduction. Obama said he told the commission everything is on the table when it comes to cutting government spending.
This is going to require people of both parties to come together and take a hard look at the growing gap between what the government spends and what the government raises in revenue. And it will require that we put politics aside, that we think more about the next generation than the next election. Everything has to be on the table. And I just met briefly with the commission and said the same thing to them.
A jailed former college student accused of aiding members of al-Qaeda has pleaded guilty on the eve of his trial. Saad Fahad Hashmi has been held in 23-hour solitary confinement for nearly 3 years. The government's case rested on the testimony and actions of an old acquaintance of Hashmi's who turned government informant after his own arrest. Hashmi was being prosecuted for a 2-week period when the informant stayed at his home carrying rain gear that was allegedly later delivered to al-Qaeda members in Pakistan. Hashmi was facing the prospect of a 70-year prison sentence were he to proceed with trial. He will be sentenced in June and now faces up to 15 years in prison. We'll speak with his brother later in the broadcast. At Guantanamo, a hearing has begun on whether the U.S. military elicited a false confession through the torture of a then-teenage prisoner accused of killing a U.S. soldier in Afghanistan. Canadian citizen Omar Khadr was 15 years old when U.S. troops imprisoned him in Afghanistan in 2002. He says U.S. military guards beat him and threatened him with rape after he arrived at Guantanamo that same year. Deputy Chief Defense Counsel Michael Berrigan said Khadr's statements at the time should be tossed out.
The defense hopes that the statements that Omar Khadr has made that the government wants to admit as evidence against him will be suppressed, and that means that they will not be allowed to be admitted in evidence against him at his commission's trial, which is currently scheduled for this summer.
Khadr is set to be tried later this year in the first military tribunal of the Obama White House. Alex Neve of Amnesty International Canada criticized Obama for continuing Bush-era policies.
I think we were expecting a lot more of the Obama administration. Obviously, in January 2009, there was great hope and tremendous expectation that this whole sorry exercise in injustice here at Guantanamo Bay was going to come to a close. And certainly by April 2010, we wouldn't be facing any military commission hearings, let alone a hearing involving someone who was 15 years old at the time of the alleged offenses, someone who alleges a harrowing litany of torture and ill treatment. That is astounding.
The Committee to Protect Journalists is calling on the U.S. to hold public inquiries into the killings of at least 19 journalists and support workers by U.S. troops in Iraq. In a letter to Defense Secretary Robert Gates, the CPJ says, quote, "Our research shows that the majority of the killings were either not sufficiently investigated or that the military failed to publicly disclose its findings." U.S. killings of journalists in Iraq have come under renewed scrutiny with the recent release of military footage capturing a 2007 attack that killed a dozen people in Baghdad, including 2 Reuters employees. The Justice Department has confirmed it's reviewing a new law in Arizona that forces police officers to determine the immigration status of someone they suspect of being an undocumented immigrant. Opponents call it the harshest anti-immigrant measure in the country and a license for racial profiling. Speaking before the Senate Judiciary Committee Tuesday, Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano said she has deep concerns about the law.
The Justice Department is reviewing the Arizona law. It does not actually take effect until 90 days after the close of the Arizona legislative session, so it is not, in fact, in effect in Arizona, which permits time, I think, for the Justice Department to really look at whether the law meets constitutional safeguards or not.
The head of the Mine Safety and Health Administration has revealed West Virginia's Upper Big Branch coal mine was cited for the highest number of different kinds of safety violations of all U.S. mines last year. 29 workers lost their lives in an explosion at the mine earlier this month. On Tuesday, MSHA hired Joseph Mann, or the head of MSHA, Joseph Maine, told a Senate hearing the mine's owner and operator, Massey Energy, employed what he called, quote, a catch-me-if-you-can approach to worker safety. Maine says his agency issued 48 withdrawal orders forcing miners to leave unsafe areas at Upper Big Branch last year, more than any other mine.